Thanks to our friends on Zoom. It's whichever way we're here, I'm just delighted that everybody could come and, of course, keep that fresh air coming. Now, do I need to do anything except point my finger? Oh, because I would never do that in a hostile or ugly way, but you know that. Sir Joseph, to you. Yes. So I would always act with the utmost principles of chivalry, right? So, yes, we understand that. And they were fairly chivalrous during the 100 Years' War, if I could get right into our topic. Yes. If you died by the longbow, I don't think it would have been a pleasant way to go. I was just thinking about the longbow, those were big things. And the individuals who operated were, in fact, mercenaries. And they were a very, very dangerous device. But the English had them, and they had trained people to function with them. And to say that the French were shocked at Crecy by these longbow is amazingly understated. It was amazing to watch. As I always put it in the books, Jane, the flower of French knights. I know it sounds like a cliche, but there you are. They just didn't know what hit them before they went to wherever they were going, eternally speaking, because they were through, those French knights. And the books always say 500 years of warfare of knights on horses gone. It was like the end of an era, because the victory of the English over the French was very, very complete. Sadly, if you were on the English side, they lacked the resources to go on and do anything with this great victory. Crecy, which you can still visit, was simply a casual place there in Western France where they ended up. That was all there was to it. Part of a series of raids that the English had been on, but I'm sure the French thought this was a wonderful opportunity for them. And so during the years, say a decade or so, the English with their supporters dreamt that they could win this thing. But in fact, we know that that was not to be. That the English would continue on and do very well. Now, Sherry, we can go on. It is to note that Calais, which some of you may have been by on your own trips, which I gather is now a major center of refugees. Yeah, but I mean, it was at one time a very lovely town and was taken over by the English until it was lost by the namesake for a favorite, what should we call it? Brunch drink called the Bloody Mary. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, she lost it. I'm not into being ugly about Bloody Mary. I'll do enough of that in the springtime. But for now, I will just note that Calais would be taken by the English. And you ever think, I bet the English were real nice and said bonjour to all the French residents. Well, you would be living a lie because they were right ugly. And I think they threw those people out of Calais, Va-t-en, and they moved in English settlers because, as you can imagine, that particular port was very, very valuable for the French. So we want to give Edward III's forces credit for that, for taking Calais, and that would be very useful for future English endeavors there in Western France. Okay, Sherry. Now, if you wonder why the English don't move on, we just think about rats and fleas. And that's all I guess I need to say about that, except thinking my friend in Zoom land, and I know she has a world of dates. But if I just say 1348, 1349, I imagine all of us will be right there and realize that this will be the initial period of the Black Death in England. So obviously that the English cannot continue with the war during those, continue with the war during those kind of conditions. I don't know if it's like you would say, oh, I'm so concerned about all the people, but obviously, you know, warriors die of the Black Death too. Nobles die of Black Death. It's not just, I mean, there are a lot of us, common folks, but nobles can die too. Warriors can die. So just can't go on with the fighting. And of course, as far as the French are concerned, they not only have to face the Black Death, but earlier than the English, they have to face revolts of the peasants. And that too can be, if you want to have a war, this can be a drag, yes. If you have revolts of the peasants, as you can imagine. So I'll have reason to come back to that. I believe the jacquerie is what it's called. And this idea of peasants finding the issues of their daily life presumably unacceptable. I don't think it's a anti-Valois protest. It's nothing of that sort, nothing that fine or like down with Philippe, down with Jean. I don't think it's any of that. I think it's just that the conditions that will reach England in 1381, when we have the great peasants' revolt that every visitor to the Tower of London has heard the beef eaters talk about. The jacquerie will keep the French in that particular area of central France involved. So darn, we have to take a break in fighting. But that's 100 Years' War, folks. I mean, it's like we have this big deal, and then everybody says, and now we're on break time. And you say, why can't we go ahead? We're so energized right now. And said, well, we just don't have the resources, or look at all the people who are dying. So we just have to take time. And so let's have a truce. And that, you know what that means? Marriage. Yeah. Not so much love, but just marriage and the big D. Yes, dowry. And we will see those dowries, man. Keep them coming. For those of us who are avaricious, not calling any names, but those of us who are avaricious, a dowry is a beautiful thing. And you can keep your china and your crystal. I cold heart, and you know what it is. Yeah, put it in the bank. So that then would be this, and you see the area more or less where the campaigns will be, and you see Calais there, and you see Crécy there, I hope, because you can see how close it is to the coast. And then we're going to go down south for our next major encounter, Sherry. Because this is another great occasion about a decade later. Edward III was probably involved with the campaigns against Scotland at this point. So I don't think he had the wherewithal personally to do both France and Scotland. So he told number one son, his favorite, Mr. Chivalry himself, the Black Prince. He said, son, I want you to be in charge. And of course, being the good boy he was, he did just what Daddy wanted. He took charge at this particular battle, and it would be another great land battle that again would show, no offense, Jenny, but it seems the French had not learned their lesson. Like Crécy at Poitiers, the French nobility just get wiped out. It's humiliating. Philip VI, the first of the Valois kings, had already died. So his son, who was, I don't know, if you talk about loser kings, they're rivals, you know, father and son. This individual is known to history by his chivalrous appellation, John the Good. Not good like going around trying to help people at the food kitchen or something, community. No, none of that. No. He's good because his manners were so poised. He loves the ladies, and the knights love him. It's all about, and your banquets. Love me some banquets. You know, it's like party hardy. You got orders, well, orders of chivalry, well, they had orders too. So that's John the Good. So he was leading this force, as was the Black Prince. And the stories of this humiliation to the French are legion, and the sources tell us the account of how that would go. Because the Black Prince, I mean, I like to think he was a loving husband and father. You know, they always start out that way. Yeah, loving husband, father, and he was a loving son, and, you know, he loved his parents. And you say, oh, well, that's good. That's +2. Okay, how about a minus? Okay, you want a minus? I'll give you a minus. If you weren't part of the group, he could be nasty, meaning civilians or you're non-noble. You know, we just really don't have much interest. You can just die. But, you know, if you're part of the group, then everything is like perfect manners. So he gets a real high score there, you know, in terms of chivalry. But if you're not part of the group, you don't get any kind of credit. You can't like unite for a day or something like that. It ain't gonna happen. So after Poitiers, the battle, he will go on, he will raise RACE, the city of Limoges. You know, you've probably been to Limoges. You've never been, but you're familiar with it. Huge, yeah. I mean, that was gone. It was gone. I think he was irritated. I think sometimes these people can get a little cross when people. No, the Black Prince.
Oh, sorry. Okay, great.
And really, what was going on with Limoges is people didn't give in enough, fast enough, because I think you get cross and irritated when you don't get your way right off. So that sealed their fate. I mean, you know, it's like what he wanted was basically for the city of Limoges to give up, and for whatever reason they did not. But anyway, so at this particular battle, and this, of course, is an illustration from one of the chronicles, and Jane, many of those pictures you have there may well come from chronicles of the day, like Sir John Froissart, who was the greatest Anglo-French chronicler of the day. And so much of what we talk about comes from him. So the Black Prince, Edward the Black Prince, the great warrior, he will be in charge. Okay, Sharon. And John the Good is captured. This is one of the most famous things. I mean, this is like something out of chess, isn't it? You just don't think that somebody's going to capture a king. And it was quite a scene, let me say, that because I think when John, I'm sure you could see around him lots of dead folks, and then all these English forces were rushing towards him, and maybe even, I'm sure, family members are dead around him. So he's more than a bit disoriented. And I think one of the knights who was fighting for the Black Prince basically said, you need to come with me. But he said it on his knees. He did not, he was never, there was nobody who was rude. I want you all to understand that. These people are very polite. Okay. So he said, and there's more. He gets together with the Black Prince and you say, God, they're just like a frat, because basically when John II comes with the presence of the Black Prince, you know, be like, oh, it's great to see you. It's like a reunion. You all were just fabulous. Oh, shucks, you're just saying that. No. They will have a banquet to honor John the Good. Yeah. Because you don't want anybody to be hurt, because we're all in this together. You know, we're all good brothers, you know, we're singing, and then we'll have adult beverages and maybe some ladies. So, yeah, I know. So all of this it's absolutely amazing, because death is all around you and destruction, but we always observe the amenities. However, that doesn't mean that John II, John the Good, is going to escape captivity. This is like the sort of buildup. Now, I know that you all are sitting there and thinking, who was John first? Yeah, if you're ever on Jeopardy, I don't want you to miss that question. So I'm going to tell you, because you'll never be satisfied and you'll demand a refund. He was the son of Louis X, who never actually became king, but they gave him a number. Yeah, because Louis, died, and then his son took power. And as a result, then John I died as a child. Mhm. But he gets that number. So very small point, but it always worries me when people say, well, John II, but we never heard about John I. And I worry about these things. Very small, but always important for quiz show purposes. Yeah. Because if Auburn contributions could be involved, we always want to think about that. So John then will be shipped across from Bordeaux. I imagine they were first class accommodations. And other members of the royal family, I think one of his sons was another POW on the ship. It's amazing though. And, they're headed for the Tower. But I think had some lovely parties there and probably played chess and had visitors. And so while it's really depressing to be a king loser, we just try to keep our spirits up because you know what we're waiting for. We're waiting for back home the folks to get the bribe, the ransom together. And that's a whole lot of Krispy Kremes. That's a lot of fundraising. Okay. We really gotta have to raise a lot of money because that's the way it works in this medieval world. Because people often say, well, why didn't they just kill King John or something like that? So, shoot, no. What good is he dead? He's worth a lot breathing. And believe me, Edward III needs money. I mean, of course, we all know kings need money, but they really need money because of war. The war is very expensive and very important for Edward III's future. Remember, the man's ruling for 50 years. So we get to follow the vicissitudes. And Jen, you remember you're talking about prosperous reign, Edward II. Well, in some ways, I get that point. He never got the chance to spend any of it. But I guess the money that Queen Isabel and Uncle Roger didn't waste would be passed on to Edward III. But it's like my mother used to say about money she gave me. It's burning a hole in your pocket. Yes. Have you ever heard that one? It's like you just can't keep money. You're a little wastrel. I know. Because we're supposed to be saving. So long ago, this is long ago. When those are ideas of the past. So we moved on. But the idea is Edward III spent a lot. And so when you think, oh, what's a little debt here and there? Well, that's the story of Edward III in the 14th century. Lots and lots of expenses. Okay, Sherry. So off we go, waiting for the ransom. But again, there's so many great games, board games, and they took him out to ride. I mean, where is he going to escape? Go out to the English countryside? I'm not sure about how that would have worked out. And I'm sure he had equestrians who were in the employ of Edward III, but he was all part of the family. Valois and Plantagenets, and they had lots of connections. But you see him there in the fleur-de-lis. And again, you say, well, it's a little embarrassing to be a prisoner. Yeah, but you want to keep your spirits up. And so I guess they have little French pep rallies or something and saying, back home, I know they miss me. And maybe there's some little Hallmark group that send cards and say, you are our sunshine. We love you. In truth, he was not. It was like ratemyking.com. I think he would have gotten 1 or 2 stars, either low or very low. Neither he nor his father were considered great kings. The current person in charge was his son named Charles, who Charles V, as he would become. I gather that the French were satisfied with that. But in fact, when the French were able to come up with the first payment, they allowed King John to return to France. And when the French could not provide the second payment, John agreed to return to captivity, which obviously it becomes very interesting in terms of individuals. You'd say, really? Yeah, he did. He just felt it was, get it, the good thing to do. Because what if he hadn't done that? Could you hold yourself up at a dinner party? Could you say, I practice the highest standards of chivalry? I don't think so. You would get depend, or you wouldn't be able to hold up your head in chivalrous society. I mean, it's ridiculous. But people say that those who were working for the royal government in France were thrilled that he was back in England, because then he didn't have any say-so in the policy. That's a sad commentary on the abilities of the king when they are glad for you to be back in London, but there you are. And there he stayed until his death. He was not in any way, I would say, missed, because he made no significant contribution to the French cause. That said, it is embarrassing, but it certainly did not affect the cause of France in the 100 Years' War or in the development of the Valois monarchy, as you know, because now number 3, Charles V, French king, is going to be a very outstanding king, and his grandson, Charles VII, as well. You notice I left out one, but we'll get to that soon enough. So at that stage, Edward III, probably when Edward III is able, maybe comes and visits his special prisoner and hangs out. But those particular years, believe it or not, when he was in his 50s, so it's said. Because remember, Edward III dies when he's 65 years old. And they talk about senility in your 50s. So I don't know the medical background of that, except to say that he spent a long time. that I would say incapacitated. And that's very, very bad for the English monarchy, as you can imagine, because you're alive, but you're no longer in control, but you are breathing. So you were still king legally. And that will be very important in the late 1360s until his death in 1377, as we'll see. So, as we say, Charles V in France. And here is the woman that I wanted to show you, because she gets a bad rap. And Jane, she may get her picture in your book because, yeah, and she might have been a very nice person. People, I know, but people like that often get a bum rap. She was some decades younger than King Edward III, and they became friends, or perhaps more than friends. The Queen died during the 1360s. And you say, well, I'm sure he was very sad. Yeah, whatever. But I'm also thinking that Alice was there to help. So Alice, who may or may not be a fortune hunter, becomes one of those in the entourage of Edward III that, according to the accusations, had control over the king. And basically, during the rest of his lifetime, and there was something like, I know you'll be shocked, so I'll just go on and say it, 30 or 40 years younger. So I'm sure nothing like that would happen now, right? But basically, you have someone here who is a powerful influence, and it's always amazing to me, I guess the sons, because he had lots of children, the daughters were all married away and didn't live around there, but it's amazing that she had enough influence over Edward III that they couldn't touch her until after the king was incapacitated. But that's how, and you can see how she is all gussied up, and someone who had an appreciation of how much influence that she must have had over the course of events, simply because she could almost control who went in, who went out to the king's quarters, that sort of thing. Now, we're not talking about a long period of time, but we are talking about a late 1360s until his death in 1377, but particularly the last years. Okay, Sharon. Meanwhile, the money issues. And why are the money issues? As we all know, whether we are from Illinois or Alabama, corruption can be a problem. Many of us accept the fact that government tends to be corrupt, but it seems to be extra corrupt during Edward III's latter years. And maybe Alice gets the blame because she is the powerful younger woman telling the king what to do. But whatever the case, the king never had the kind of money he needed. The idea of the king living on his own sounds good. And what that means is, in essence, you never have to ask anybody for anything because, we have lands. We've got revenues coming in. So thank y'all for coming. But we don't really need anything, but we just appreciate you offering. Well, that's mighty nice while it lasts, but other factors play into this. And of course, that's going to be wonderful for the institution of Parliament. Parliament's not new under Edward III, but never had it been able to realize itself. Because, you say, oh, it's good to be needed. You just don't know how. Because if you take their money, then you better be prepared to give them something, because it's a two-way street. So somebody said, oh, I just want to give you money. You better be really careful because it's very rare, certainly in these historical situations. But then you don't have a choice if you are Edward III, because we want war against France, and it's costly. And that's I hate to say godsend, but it's fortuitous for the development of Parliament, as we are going to see. Okay, Sherry. Now, we know that the reign of Edward III, 14th century, is absolutely crucial for the history, the institutional history of Parliament. It's like if you brought back Edward I, or you brought back Edward II, even say, well, what about us? Aren't we important? In a way. But the idea of people coming, sort of hang out with the king, that's where all this starts, to put it crudely. The king calling his great lords, sort of in the feudal tradition of we meet and talk about business, and then the great clergy, the archbishop of this or the abbot of that, they come and talk with me being king. But then the idea of organization, institutionalization, and separation is very much a feature of the reign of Edward III. And in part, it's not something that Edward III did. It's just the times brought it about. It's like anything else. It's like the evolution of government, of administration. Governments in our medieval world did not just spring up with various institutions. They all just evolved over time. I won't subject you to a boring discussion of the evolution of the exchequer. That would really be painful. I would have to shut the doors and lock them. You would try to make a run for it, because administrative history can be rough. Yeah, I know it. Say, yeah, you're already dreaming to get out. But all of this is to say that Parliament had the financial wherewithal to develop itself and to serve as, well, you've heard me speak of this before, the community of the realm representing. And I always say, we never want to think of little d democracy. Gosh, those people would turn over if they heard anybody say that. Oh, yeah, we're all about freedom and the right. No, 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 no. Parliament represents those who are in charge, and they claim to speak for everybody. So you could go out to peasants, or you could go out to the artisans in the towns and say, you know, we are speaking for you. And they say, oh, thank you. I mean, it's like, but no one asks them. But as we are going to see, these groups who will ultimately become the House of Commons, the lower house, will be a combination of knights and the burghers from the towns and cities. I like to call them the Rotary Club people. And that's great because these are the folks of influence. Could be folks up here on Ross Street where I live. It could be like the city hall and all those big shots. And you think, well, those are not the little people. Shoot, no. I mean, that's a Lee County who's who. But the world, shocking as it may be, is larger than Lee County. So sometimes you get out. And that's the idea that these individuals will realize the clout that they will have, that they will be represented in this House of Commons, the townspeople. And the way they get together with the knights is a fascinating one to me, because the knights are the sort of lower nobles, individuals with great estates, but not quite important enough to be in the ranks of the nobility. The idea then of knights and townsfolk coming together through marriage or income or whatever it is, and they will just realize that their interests are sufficiently in common. I don't mean exactly the same, but they have enough in common. That's how you will have the House of Commons. Because the knights had originally been associated with lords, because of, I guess, their social station. Because I'm sure that first wedding between a knightly boy and a town girl, that was rough. Because I bet you that boy didn't want. He said, oh, mommy, do I have to? He said, yeah, we need the money. We really do. They've got that dowry. And you'll be really well fixed. And when I need to move in, yeah, that can help me too. I mean, it's really amazing to think about stuff like that. But that's how these families began to mix. And 2 generations, they won't know. We've got these townspeople in our blood, and we can act like we're hoity-toity, just like, we can stick up our nose, It's really funny that way. But the House of Lords, they will occupy, obviously, a greater significance in the earlier years, but their powers, their authorities, by acceptance, sort of like, we don't have to like it. Because Edward III didn't like any of this. I mean, it's like stiff upper lip. I mean, you were just, this is the way it's going to be. And I think sometimes he would do like, what would you call it? It's sort of like that. You don't want to do something, so you accept it, but you act ugly when you accept it. And so you don't do it with a good spirit. And I think that's kind of like the Crown in these situations when they announce about initiating financial proposals, and some are accepted and some are not. And I think the Crown didn't necessarily agree with the way it was done, but that's the way it will go. That financial proposals will stem from Commons and accepted and then approved by the House of Lords. And that is amazing in and of itself when you think about who the Lords are. I don't even know if in another generation too, there'll still be a House of Lords. I mean, it's really changed. But here is what we see, the kernel of the future is going to be with this House of Commons, obviously. So that's part of their power. And the second, of course, is the right of impeachment and conviction. Not to be confused, but to be aware of the fact that the year before the king's death, he had the indignity, and I don't know how much he was mentally aware, but the idea that they would actually impeach and try officials. This was known as the Good Parliament, and it's called good because of they are trying to stamp out corruption. And we know that this happens periodically. That's why sometimes we have to incarcerate. Yes. The filth of malfeasance. I'm sure you don't know anybody like that. I know. But sometimes I've read a Chicago paper. Yes. Not to pick on the great state of Illinois. We love Illinois. Wonderful state, but some people have had to do time. Nice time, not hard time. Nice time, good time. But all of that is to say that around, could you imagine? I mean, you have a king who is basically senile. And so these people are going around stealing, ripping off, whatever you want to call it. And so this parliament basically is going to impeach and convict them. And I'm sure that some of these people said, well, you can't do that to me. Do you know who I am? Oh, yeah. Student say that to me one time. Yeah. Just about fell out of my chair. But anyway, that's the way that these royal officials were. We're far too important. And, it's a lot like today. I mean, we got the tapes. We got this recordings. We know you were, doing all this corruption. But they had enough on them, including Alice, that they were prepared to act. And so if they couldn't execute them, they might exile them. I guess it could be like after you convict them, you could more or less do a no contest, no contender. More or less, you need maybe to visit France. And who could imagine that that would not be a lovely place to be? Because it would not be a good place to be in England, because with a king who was indisposed, shall we say, and you have been convicted by Parliament of malfeasance. Because this is not, again, just the impeachment by the lower house. This involves a conviction. Clearly, that's the way our own American system began, if you ever thought about that. And we might not have if it had not been for the last few years. And so I don't have to say to somebody, gosh, can you imagine that? Think of Andrew Johnson, but no, it's been more recent. But it's basically the idea of impeachment in the lower, conviction in the upper, if they choose to do so. And that happened to various people. And they were definitely put out of power, at least for a time. Well, it's 1376, so you figure that with the king's death, well, imminent in 1377, that things are going to change anyway. Okay, Sharon. So he died, and of course, now things will really change. 1327 to 1377, I think you could agree, is a very long reign. One of the longest, maybe not like Queen Elizabeth II or Victoria, but still very long, even counting the period of Mom and Uncle Roger. We still got a very, very lengthy period. We have our ups and we have our downs, that's for sure. But no one would doubt the great significance of the period when we think particularly of Geoffrey Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales, lest we forget. If anybody here has gotten through Piers Plowman by William Langland, I bless you. I want to say you are a saint. You are wonderful. Some of this, the reading of 14th century literature is very interesting and very significant. If you had it in literature classes in college, my hat's off to you. But anyway, all of that is part of the period. And of course, we never forget religious dissent in the form of people who are, some would say, proto-Protestants, in the form of the Lollards, as you know. But that said, that definitely didn't concern the royal court. Their movement or their interest in religious dissent was very, very small, I dare say, and they simply were pro forma Catholics for the most part. But go on, Sherry, thank you. So I love the fact, and again, this goes down in religious tradition, or rather the tales that are told about Alice, that she stripped him of the jewelry. And I mean, that is pretty picturesque. If you're thinking about, oh, Alice, you're so pretty. Okay, let's hold up that finger. Because, I mean, let's face it, if you were in Alice's position, you're not going to be in the will. you need to get whatever you're going to get. What did they used to say? You better get while the getting's good. Yeah, and I'm thinking that was probably true for Alice. We don't hear any more about Alice, and I'm hoping she could pawn all this stuff in, and then she could go away, maybe move to Scotland, and then enjoy the proceeds from the sale of the king's jewelry. But if you were part of this court of the elderly Edward III, it was time to retire. Go emeritus, I say, because it's not like you can hang out and say, new king, I'd love to help you. Could I be an advisor, or do you need some extra administrators? No, we're going to get a new crowd because you're gone. And oddly enough, despite all of the children of Edward III, and we saw that, and we're going to see it again, actually, the eldest son died the year before. One of the ironies, I would say, of Plantagenet history will be the death of the Black Prince in 1376. So often we ask ourselves, and we ask this about some American presidents too, would he have been a great king had he lasted one more year? Well, we'll never know, will we? It's very, very hard to say. I'm telling you, he had what they say now, anger management issues. Yeah, I know it's hard to think about. Sorry. But I mean, anybody who's willing to raise Limoges is not a guy who can say, yeah, I know y'all, but I really love y'all's China. So y'all just, no, because battering, yeah, so he's a rough character, the Black Prince. And as we are going to see, his brothers were very, very important people, but I think they knew and accepted. And, with a house full of them, imagine that many of us can relate, and you can understand that these people were, or at least seem to be, from what is known, respectful towards the elder brother because of the father's wishes. And definitely he spent much of this time, that is the Black Prince, in France, along with his wife, who was his first cousin, and his little boy, who had been born there. And he will be known to history as Sir Richard of Bordeaux because of his background. That's true. But you can call him Richard II because that's how we know him. Now, the idea of the Commons and the Lords being dedicated to furthering the interests of ordinary people, that of course can be taken way too far, so we don't ever want to go there. That there are going to be programs to help people and say, oh, since you have all these children and have to have a job, well, we're going to have a government program to help you. No, we're not. That's up to the church. The church does all that. More or less, our interests are going to serve what the politicians always like to say, special interests. Yes. And guess what? There is no London Times or any of that who can annoy us by by saying, well, that's not fair. That's the way it is. And so when we talk about Parliament and understand that the statutes, which originally had been what we call propositions, it's like people come to meet with the king and they're going to have proposals. Can we just talk to you about this? And the king and his representatives say, you can talk, but I'm not interested. If you can get away with that, but when these groups are going to say, in effect, this is a statute that we want to present, it's like saying in Congress today, as happened, that they present a proposal for a law, and then it will go through the House and the Senate and signed by the president. The same way that this began, this whole idea of people coming with ideas. Again, I want to say the king doesn't necessarily like it, but you know what? Money talks. And when the king, and remember, they can't meet without the king calling them together at this particular time. It's not as if they can just say, well, you know, we don't care what you think. We're coming for a meeting. That will come later. But when they do so, they are going to present these proposals. So, the most interesting, which I think will be incredibly important, and which we have preserved all these many centuries, of course, definitely would not be something if you were someone who worked out in the fields. You would not appreciate it very much. It's called the statute of laborers. The uppers, probably, you know, the commons, you know, many of these people who had great estates. And then, of course, even monks, you know, they had great estates too. They might say, we'll look after them, but we don't want any sassy workers. Because the statute of laborers, in essence, says that people should have the same pay that they had prior to the plague. They do not want to see inflation. Yes, no one likes inflation. We don't like it now, and they didn't like it then. And we get in the Chronicles, I love this, about impudent peasants, you know, who are saying, well, if we're going to work in your field, we expect A, B, and C. And for some reason, lords, monastic abbots, or whoever they may be, they don't like it a lot. But, you know, you're saying, but how is there going to be justice? Well, the justice is you do what I say. So some of these folks don't have good luck with that. So they go to Parliament, and Parliament says, sure, we'll take care of it. The king agrees to it. It's almost like, gosh, I guess it was what, 1971, the freezing of wages and prices. So the statute of labor basically, and of course it didn't work, never does. But the idea is you can't offer somebody more wage than they would have received before the Black Death. And all of this has the effect, I'm sure, of creating greater unhappiness. But it certainly would have made the owners of the great estates happy, as you can imagine. Seems very odd. I just mentioned this as an example. This was presented to the royal government because this is what Parliament wanted. And it's not like any member of Commons is saying, no, it's not fair. There's nobody playing a medieval Jimmy Stewart, up there saying the people need more money, I won't emote, don't worry. But it's that idea that isn't going to happen. These people do not seem to be terribly concerned about workers' rights. And certainly, I think somebody asked me this one. Were there any peasants who were members of Parliament? No. That's centuries away. Another class, another year. But that ain't going to happen anywhere. So don't hold your breath on this one. Parliament is an institute for what we call the property classes, the landed classes, or people with influence and advantage. Okay. Here he is. And as you can see in the attire of the great warrior, and of course in France. And not surprisingly so, because that's where he spent his life. And by the way, not to make this into a Hallmark movie, but he and his wife actually loved each other. I know. I know. You're going like, what's happening? But it's like these cousins, they were crazy about each other. And we do have correspondence that would indicate a genuine affection between them. And of course, a mother who was very devoted to her son, Richard of Bordeaux, as he came to be known as a small child, because he was a small child when his father died in 1376. But yes, that's quite the tomb, isn't it, when you see him there in his apparel there. And I imagine that was quite a task of developing that particular tomb. Joan of Kent was his wife, and it's not without significance that she is known Kent, because her family was part of Edward's family as well. That Edward II's brother would have been Joan's father. Okay, show you that. So he had become de facto ruler of English territories in France during his father's later years. In fact, it was probably because of his issues, anger management issues, and he was not tactful with many of the great lords in the English territory in France. So that's a long way of saying that much of the territories that the English had gained in their battles were lost by the time of his death in 1376. It's like, really, after all the expense, after all the casualties, by that mid 1370s, it all seemed in vain. And so the great question is, of course, does that mean then that we're just going to give it up? Oh, no. There's got to be a way that the English can win this battle with France. So we never say at this point, look, there's a lot coming up because they don't know the future. Because they got some great things that are going to happen. North America, we love Canada, we love the United States. Then there's India. We've got so many neat things coming up. Happily or unhappily for these folks, they didn't know that. So they are very excited about France as they are about Scotland and Ireland. That keeps them motivated. So that's how we know it. Okay, sure. And here he is, and you say, gosh, he was young. Well, I guess he is. And he's dead in 1399. He is dead before he becomes 30 years old. So when we get into the stories of Richard II, let's always recall how we were at that age and say, do you think I would have been a good king or queen at that age? Would I have been unselfish enough, wise enough? Yes, Mama, that's a good idea. Yeah, let's be honest here. Could be very difficult. Notwithstanding that, though, Richard did have his issues. He had some serious issues. Now, I might start off by noting that at one time we had something, thank goodness we don't hear as much about it now, but I may have told some of you about it before. Psychohistory. And if you are familiar with it, don't be afraid. It's not like I'm going to tear down shower curtains. Nothing of that. So, well, let me take you back. As a lad, I was going to the library, not surprising, and I found a book, and nobody had checked it out. So I just, couldn't wait. I was very excited. And the book was a biography of one of my childhood heroes, Woodrow Wilson. And the librarian, I'm from a small town, looked at me a little leerily and thought, I wonder if you sort of like your parents know you have this book. You say, oh, censorship. You got to understand, it's a long time ago, small town. So the book I pored over, and it was an example of psychohistory. It was written by, yes, Sigmund Freud and one of the officials in the Wilson government by the name of Bullitt. What it attempts to do is put these people, when they're long gone, on the couch and say, and then what did your father say? Oh, did you really love your mother? And I mean, you're thinking like, and so I'm reading this, and all of my childhood beliefs in Woodrow Wilson, like, I'm like shaking the book and I say, no. There's another one that some of you will be familiar with, Young Man Luther, which was another biography in which they talk about Martin Luther's problems with his parents. Oh, yes. So that take you to the couch. I see. Puff, puff. And psychohistory had a wave in the 1970s, and we survived it. So we moved on. But Richard II has undergone his share of issues about his relationship with his parents, because this is very odd. Now, he has that string of uncles. We never forget that. And you say, oh, well, that's wonderful. Because this is like Thanksgiving, gather around the table, turkey and dressing and all. I mean, all the joy of family, not so much, huh? Yeah, because in this case, we often think about the fact that Richard II and his mother are more or less going to have to deal with a lot of selfish, nasty people. And now, I mean, his mother was a strong person, no doubt about that. But she will often have to call upon someone who is either her ally or the ally of her husband, and that will be his younger brother, one of the most famous characters in English history. You know, one of those people who went to bed every night thinking, I should be king, I should be king, but he wasn't. But he was the next thing too. Kind of like the Avis rental car used to say, we're number two, but we try harder. Yeah, I mean, we can't all be Hertz. So what can we do? We can be then people who in fact are capable of helping. And that will be John of Gaunt. John of Gaunt, the Earl of Lancaster, and the very title of being Lancaster gives you an idea about how much land he had. He's known as John of Gaunt, and this could be a quiz show question. He was born in Ghent. Yes. Remember, his mother is Flemish. And so maybe she was on a vacation, family trip, because this would have been about number two, I would think, at that particular time when he was born. All of his life, and has anybody read the novel by Anya Seton about John of Gaunt's third wife, Catherine? Maybe that was too long ago, but he would be married and always trying to develop his interests. It's sort of like, how do I make up for not being king? Well, he will be, in essence, kind of developing or trying to the government on behalf of his young nephew. Richard II, you see, is all alone except his mother. And his mother's a very powerful person, I'll grant you that. But she will share power in a way with her brother-in-law, John of Gaunt, the second son. So that's very important, because there'll be lots of other nephews, no doubt about that. I mean, lots of other uncles, I should say. See, Richard II was an only child. There are no other males or females. So it's just mom and me. And now Uncle John. And you say, is John really devoted to Richard II? Well, he is, insofar as it is significant for my interest. His first wife, the mother of his children, who is actually the heiress to all those Lancastrian lands, And you say, I wonder if they were related. You bet they were. I mean, this is some serious cousin mixing. It's really, really lucky that a lot of folks didn't have more, those issues like the Habsburgs. But in fact, we know that they were related, but he becomes the ruler of these Lancastrian lands. He is so powerful, folks, that he really has more lands than the royal lands. And he had his own army as a great lord. But then she dies, the first wife. So then he marries someone from Aragon. And he's really concerned about Aragon and Castile. So we need to go south. Yes. Can we get enough? Crossing over to France and then say, oh, I want to fight for my wife. Right. I bet you really, what a wonderful husband you are. So yeah, he spends a lot of time fighting for his control over his wife's lands. So John of Gaunt has a full plate because he's got to protect Richard II as best he can, plus all of his other interests that we would consider him to be a sort of vice king or even higher than that. But he was a man throughout his life, and he lived till 1397, 1398. So he lived a very long time, and he did so as I would think was the most powerful person in that period of 14th century England, other than the king himself. Now, Frank, would you want to have time for questions?
I think you have plenty.
Okay.
So the question would be, in this group here, anybody here have a question? Then we'll get to the, you read that off, what?
Okay. I just don't want
Okay.
Well, do we have a question?
Jenny.
Oh,
Okay,
Jenny.
you mentioned Catherine, his third wife.
to. Catherine Swinford.
Swinford, what lands did she have?
She had none. Oh, you'll love this one. That's why I wondered about if anybody here likes novels about love, yeah, that's the one for you. The person who wrote is Anya Seton, Seton. And I was just reading a reference to that because the story that she will weave hundreds of pages is about she was the true love of John of Gaunt. He goes through all these other marriages, but it's all about land or about power. And he has children by Catherine Swinford. I'm so glad I got to tell us. Thanks, Shannon. Because when wife number 2 dies, he marries her. And she had all those children. And those children are, of course, illegitimate. But John of Gaunt will have those children made legitimate. They're not eligible to be ruler. You can't go that far. But otherwise, they will have total legal rights and they will have great power into what we're going to see later in this course, the Lancastrians, because they, as we say in the South, kissing cousins. And I guess nobody brings up love child or any of that, but these are called the Beaufort children. Yes. And one's a cardinal, and fascinating people, but those are all children that were special conceptions.
They were all here.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, And you get the idea that he would visit and hang out. Again, if you want to believe these novels. And yeah, but I always love you, baby. You're the one. And that Castilian, and that Lancastrian, yeah, they're okay, but not like you, baby. Share on me. Yeah.
Where's she from? Catherine.
Catherine Swinford. Well, she was English,
Okay.
but yeah, she was probably up from the Lancastrian area. That's in central England, isn't it? So, yeah, she was, but yeah, she was the true love. So, according to some romantics, but that relationship will be significant because of the children. And so she'll be wife number 3 as a result of that, which is very unusual when you think about it. There were 3 or 4 children, and I think and that will be a Tudor ancestor. And that's the truth. And you think, how did that happen? It's just because of circumstances that it becomes about. I mean, it's like that would have been the grandmother of Henry VII. But next time, remember, we're going to have a nice tree for you.
Big tree.
Yes, a big tree, and it's got branches. And so you're going to be very excited. You'll just brag in other tree classes about, I've got a tree that you're going to be really jealous of. Yes, when you see all the Lancastrians and Yorkists. Yes, and you'll love this one. Well, thank y'all very much. Okay,
Thank you. Thank you.
here's Marge.
Thank you.
Might have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, Marge.
Any questions?
Hi. I hope to be back soon.
Hey. But we had to see Marge. Does she know that we're
I don't think so.
okay?
I know. I see.
Volume on her.
And Tim Marge's nice fingers and